our history. Buildings and people and memories and dreams. Who better to tell us than those who were there? There's so much to learn from the stories they'll share. Living history. Living history.
Welcome to Living History with Ted Goldsborough. We're joined again by our friend Max Buten. We talked last time about your family history in Philadelphia, your grandmother's living in a house on Osage Avenue, and about Jewish customs and Jewish life in Lower Merion. Max, you were talking about Jewish infiltration, Jewish settlement development in Lower Merion. Anything more to tell me about that?
Well, when I started, there were very few Jews in Lower Merion, and our house happened to be between two Catholic families. One day when I was in 5th or 6th grade, they came by, and I think they repeated what they'd been taught in Catholic school that day and called me a Christ killer.
Did you know?
I had never heard of this idea before, and so I didn't get upset at it. It's just too far out for me to understand. But even by 1950, when I graduated from Lower Merion, there's 25 Jews out of 425 or thereabouts in my class. So the percentage of Jews is now much higher. In fact, one of the people we've been talking to, the people on Edgewood Road, have told me that they're so happy to be living in Lower Merion because it's so friendly to Jews. Mm. There's a kosher butcher. There are now like over a half a dozen synagogues of various sects, I guess. And it's just more, less Christian than it used to be, less concentrated. It was worse for black people. The best example of that would be our senior class trip when we went to Washington, and black members of the class were not invited. Why? Because there was not a hotel in D.C. that would admit them. Mm. Mm. So they were just left out. Mm. And of course I never heard about this until 60 years later at our anniversary. At Penn, there were about half a dozen black people in the entire class. Wow. Of, I don't know, a couple thousand.
Jeez.
Unfortunate to have been admitted to Penn and to go to a good school because there was just no competition. There weren't scholarships for the majority of students as there are now, and there were not a lot of people who could afford to go to a school like Penn.
Mm-hmm. Did you lived on campus?
No, I lived at home until my last term. I'd gotten a driver's license suspension, so I couldn't drive to school anymore for 90 days. So I lived in an apartment on top of John the Jeweler on Spruce Street in Philadelphia, right in the middle of the campus.
When you were a kid, let's say junior high, high school, where was the library, the public library?
Yeah, it was the Ballackinwood Library, and it was in what is now the Levering Mill House, senior house on Levering Mill Road, which is, I think, part of the women's club or associated with a women's club next door. The children's library was in the basement, and I spent a lot of time there. Lots of good books for me. I had good books at home too, to read, and even I read Fortune magazine, which was mostly looking at the pictures. A wonderful picture of the Germans attacking Russia and how the Russian defenses were 90 miles deep, and with pictures and X's and O's and pictures of troops. It was great.
Where was the movie theater in our childhood?
The movie theater was just right where it still is. The Narberth movie, which I never went to as a kid, and the Egyptian movie on Bowman Avenue, now the Bala movie, or as we sometimes called it then, the Egg Pit. I was not a big movie goer, but I would walk over to the Egyptian on some Saturday afternoons and I would see part of the serial, this week's episode of the serial, but it would always be a serial that I had not seen the other parts of, so it didn't mean anything at all to me. And then some comedy or other or something, and then I would walk home and stop at Benson's drugstore in Kenwood for a milkshake, which was 20 cents. Not on Saturday afternoons, but I would also get my hair cut there at Vince Cirillo's barbershop. His son, who also cut my hair on occasion, became Supreme Court Justice in the state of Pennsylvania. His grandson went to school with my son and has been running for commissioner in Lower Merion. I think it looks like he's starting another run. So that's a family that did very well just under my own eyes, and I could see grow and grow.
You mentioned taking the trolley when you were young into Philadelphia and walking here and there. Was it safer for kids when we were younger?
Well, apparently there was not, let's put it the other way, there was not the fear that there is today. I mean, people don't let their kids do anything. My son won't let his children be named on the web. It won't be let. They're afraid of things that were not a problem in those days.
You mentioned D-Day. What is D-Day?
D-Day was the day that the Allied forces invaded Normandy in France, June the 6th, 1944. It was a special day in Kenwood School because in music class the radio was on. The radio was as big as this table, more or less, and it had never been turned on in school day before. I'm not sure why they had a radio. But it was on to let us know or let us follow what was happening. And it was a pretty good technical advancement that they were able to bring live radio, I think, from Normandy Beach right to here. Before then, let me go back to the beginning of the war, when we would my family would meet every Sunday at my grandmother's house on Osage Avenue, and the men would play pinochle, and the women would talk. They were all wearing fur stoles, fox fur stoles with a fox's head at one end and another fox's head at the other end, and you could stick your finger into the fox's mouth and feel his sharp teeth. All my aunts seemed to have them. And the kids, I don't know what they would do. The ones that were a little older would talk in Op language or Pig Latin Do we have to explain what Pig Latin is?
I don't know if they do it anymore.
Splain ex uto uye otwe igpe atenle is one, forget about it.
What did you just do?
I said explain. I just said explain what Pig Latin is. No way. And they would play some card game called Pishu Peshu, which I never learned because I was somehow the youngest one. I was the oldest in my family, but all the older cousins were older because my father was the youngest of the 8. So sometimes I would hold the nickels and dimes for my father and be his cashier, just to keep me from going crazy. But then they would stop it, not for Jack Benny, who was on at 7 o'clock, but to listen to Father Coughlin at 7:30 or something like that, or maybe he was before, I don't know. He was a notorious anti-Semite, and they would listen to him to get their ire up. They would really complain.
Ooh.
And one Sunday, all the news, all that was on was, well, I think Jack Benny was interrupted or something was interrupted, maybe Fred Allen, with news of the invasion of Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. That was December 7th, 1941. And that was certainly a big event that happened on the radio. Radio wasn't important to me after that, and after the end of the war, until maybe American Bandstand came on in Philadelphia when I was, I think, maybe a freshman in college, senior in high school, and started to get into contemporary music, and I would hear the kids dancing at the studio at 46th and Market, and they had a column in the newspaper, and later we're on television, of course, but this was in radio days.
Understand at the present time, we've been at war, the United States has been at war longer than practically any other war in American history. What was different about wartime, World War II, and today's wars?
Well, today's wars don't seem to affect us at all. There's no shortage, no rationing, no draft.
Seldom see people in uniform.
Yep. And in those days, the life was rearranged because of the war to cooperate and help win the war. Foods were rationed, gasoline was rationed, butter was certainly rationed. Fat was needed for the war effort. I can't imagine why.
Bombs, napalm.
They didn't have napalm then.
That was what we heard.
So one day, the Phillies, or maybe it was the Athletics, I'm not sure, had free admission if you brought 3 pounds of fat to the ballpark. Well, my mom got out her used fat can, and it was only about 2 pounds. So then she got out a chicken, and she rendered all the fat out of it by heating it up and cooking the chicken.
Jeez.
And it was about 2 pounds and 3/4, but I took it anywhere. I took, of course, the bus and then 2 trolleys, a trackless trolley in between, to Shibe Park in Philadelphia with this can of fat kind of sloshing around in the top.
Jeez.
Expecting them to have a fine scale to weigh it by the gram. No, they just took the can and threw it in a barrel. And off I went to see the very hapless Phillies or Athletics. Both of them were not good.
You mentioned Sailor's cream cheese.
Oh, yeah.
What was that?
As I said, butter was rationed, so cream cheese was a good substitute. And so there was I think a chain of a couple Philadelphia stores called Sailors. One of them on 54th Street, past the man school where I went. And they had these big tubs of cream cheese, about this high and round and this much in diameter. And if you wanted a pound, they would cut you a pound. And if it was a little over, it was okay. And so we would go there very regularly for cream cheese. Then in the next block, we would go for black bread. There's nothing so good as Russian black bread and cream cheese. Still to this day, I wish I could find more Russian black bread.
So what about bagels?
Bagels were not a major item in those days. They existed, but they were only for Jews or only eaten by Jews. Certainly never in the frozen food counter. And other things that we did to promote the war was help Chinese war relief and Russian war relief. One day, a Russian sharpshooter, a woman by the name of Ludmila Pavlichenko, came to Philadelphia, and I went to the party that featured her. It was a great honor to meet a Russian sharpshooter. And somehow, with the Boy Scouts, got to go to a tank plant in Chester. It was Chrysler Corporation made tanks, and we got to ride in the tank, which was a treat for us. Also, one day saw tanks driving down Market Street in a parade or something like that, and the treads chewing up the street. It was not good.
Did you have any military experience?
Yes, of course. 2 years out of Penn, I was drafted, and I went to basic training in Columbia, South Carolina, and then I was a rocket engineer in Huntsville, Alabama, where they were building missiles in a operation that was led by the German scientists who had built the missiles that attacked London. So I was working on a little and very unsuccessful rocket called the Little John. It was designed to carry a little atomic bomb, and the accuracy of the thing was so bad that you needed an atomic bomb to be sure of getting your target. It was never put into action, which is good.
Did you get to travel when you were in the military?
Yeah, part of the job I had was carrying things and going off to observe in different places. So I went as a private to the parachute jumpers place in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where I met with 3 or 4 generals, which was intimidating a little bit. But I had better trips to Colorado, where I had a girlfriend, in St. Louis, and White Sands Proving Ground, where they were firing Little Johns and other things. In New Mexico, that always involved a side trip to Tijuana, which is now too dangerous a place to take a side trip to. Well, it wasn't then. It was pretty wide open, though. And North Jersey and Illinois. Yeah, I traveled a lot, and then I went on leave for 30 days, saved up my leave, because I didn't need to get out of there too much, because I already was traveling. And for 30 days I went to Europe, hitchhiking again on Army or Air Force planes. I flew to Frankfurt, met a friend of mine who was in the Army in Munich, and we went to the Brussels World's Fair, and then we went to see the tulips, and then I went back with him to Munich, and then got as far as Greece, where we had an apartment facing the Parthenon, which was very nice.
Boy. Now,
so I've been traveling ever since. and started way before that, actually. Started traveling. Boy, where to start?
With your family?
With my family. My father drove us to Boston one Christmas, and then we drove to Mexico by way of Canada.
Wow.
And in 1947, 8, 9, whatever, when I was just 16 and had a driver's license, the two of us drove the family all the way across the United States and up into Canada and back. He bought a DeSoto limousine, I guess it was. Which had an extra row of jump seats. So there were 6 of us in the family, and Miss Cochin all drove in the car. My brother, who was about 7, sat between my father and me in the front seat, except he sat on a bread box where we kept our storage. Of course, none of us had seat belts, and we blew 4 tires one at a time because they weren't strong enough, presumably, for that heavy car with so many people and luggage on the roof. But we didn't have any problem there.
Where did you stay in hotels?
We stayed in hotels and motels, yes, mostly motels, it seems to me. Bought my first pair of jeans.
That was quite a trip.
Oh, yeah, 7 weeks. Then 2 years later, took the family to Europe for almost as long, to France and Switzerland and little Germany and England. And on that trip, we went to the Wedgwood factory.
Speaking of which.
So we could talk about that.
Okay. Your dad, or mother, I guess we have to go back to one family member bought a piece of Wedgwood as an anniversary present, or?
Yeah, my mother and father went off on their first wedding anniversary. This would be 1931, and they were in Montreal, I think, and they bought one piece of Wedgwood, this little pitcher, which looks more or less like this cup, or the glaze is like the cup. And my father was a collector all his life. He was collecting prints and books and stuff when he was in college. And had other collections by and by, stamps, coins, Gallet glass, other glasses, Jewish ceremonial objects, sheet music, all sorts of things. Eventually, he concentrated more and more on Wedgwood. And when I was in the Army in 1957, he decided that it was time to change from a house full of Wedgwood to a museum full of Wedgwood with a couple of bedrooms and a couple of kitchens. It was a big house, 44 rooms. So there was room for him to keep buying stuff and stashing it away and putting it on exhibit and changing it and so forth. So he opened a museum, and it was full of Wedgwood. This is a magazine that featured the Buten Museum within the music room, which is now converted to Gallery A, with the wood paneling and lots of Wedgwood. My mother's the original piece. My mother, Wedgwood all over everywhere, all over the house. My father ran it. Do we have my father with some Wedgwood somewhere?
I don't think so.
No, I guess not.
I don't think so.
But there was Wedgwood all over the house.
Did he give tours? Was it open to the public?
Yeah, it was open to the public 2 afternoons a week, and he had a Wedgwood group that came one Sunday a month, and he had an annual meeting of Wedgwood Seminar, which was an international group. So it was quite a substantial operation for a one-man show, which is really what it was. He had a half a dozen or more women who would come and be docents and lead some tours and so forth, and became good Wedgwood collectors and good scholars. He ran it until he died in about 40 years ago, and then my brother ran it for a while. My mother was always a big part of the operation, and at the end she was with a secretary. My brother tried to make it a more regular and public museum, and more scholarly, and was able to publish several books, as my father also had, but they were in addition to them. And it ran, well, people wouldn't really contribute to the museum because they figured that the Butens were rich and they would take care of it. Well, the peak of our business, I guess, was in the early 50s and late 40s, when we didn't have the competition that we would have later. When people were concentrating on keeping their houses up and not throwing them away as we do today, and whether I don't know, we were not able to keep up the growth that we needed to prosper, to continue to prosper. One of the reasons was that there were 4 owners to the business, and later 2 other owners were cut in, and they were taking out more money than the business really could afford, and the formula stopped working. So the business got up to 29 stores several times, never got up to 30, and the partners got out that existed and had to be paid off, and so it went on, and eventually we sold it. Mm-hmm. And I think those of us who participated in the sale are very happy that we did. We're living better and have enough money from it. It was never in the ranks of George Friedland's business, which also went bad eventually, or many other people's.
Well, Max, unfortunately we're out of time at the moment, and we kind of wrap it up. But we'd like to have you back to talk about the Wedgwood Museum and your family's collection. Thanks for joining us on Living History with Ted Goldsboro, and we hope that you'll come back and see us next time.